I think social reform because when I was 18, there was a draft, and my birthday was February 28th, and I was picked number one. So I was of the belief as a senior in my last few months of high school that I was going to go to Vietnam. So I was pretty tuned in to social reform and all the war and all that. Luckily, in May of that year, President Nixon ended the draft. I did not have to go, and I was able to just go to college and resume my college career. But I would say social reform.
I believe social reform. I think it changed the way women were in society, and it gave us a lot more freedom and rights. During the 60s and 70s, I believe birth control came out, and it made it easy for and freer for women to have relations with men, so they weren't afraid to get pregnant. So it changed a lot of the way people looked at society. They were free love was the big thing back in the 70s, because you could just sleep with whoever you wanted and do whatever you wanted because you didn't have any consequences at the time, they thought. Later they found out that STDs were a thing, but but at the time they thought it was a great thing to be able to love everybody. And then the peace movements came out after the Vietnam War, and the people resented the government and acted upon the peace and free love with protests.
The big thing that started it all was music. The British invasion, the Beatles, and then their look, and then all the other British pop groups that came out, and it changed the entire world of music. And with that, of course, the fashion that they all wore went into place, and it just, then the music started changing with the Vietnam War, and then all the different types of political changes, and that came into effect. So it all melded together.
From what I can tell, a lot of it was centered around the war. The war was, before the United States got involved in the Vietnam War, the French were involved in that same dynamic, and they had the same experience. They couldn't win it either, and unfortunately, our leaders decided to go into this war, and we had the same result. I mean, the soldiers that came back were totally disrespected by everybody. They weren't say, hey, nice job and you're patriot. They were totally disrespect. People spit on them and all kinds of things. It was sad. And plus, there was a lot of in that time frame, there was a lot of drug and alcohol use, and a lot of that was rampant in the military. A lot of smoking as well, regular cigarettes, or marijuana, I guess. So it was just a really complex time, and that's kind of where it ended up.
I think it had a lot to do, well, the Vietnam War was a big part of the peace part of it. People protested against the war. They felt like we did not belong in the Vietnam War, and that our government was going against the wishes of the people, basically. So I think that had a lot to do with why people were fighting against the government. And I think that as far as the free love comes, that had everything to do with the invention of birth control pills.
But I think a large part of it was the escalation of the Vietnam War, and it became very unpopular, and there was a very anxious young group of people that didn't want any part of that, and it just took on a life of its own.
I think it had a positive impact. I think whenever you have times like that, or even times like we're having now politically, I think it's good, even though people might be uncomfortable with it. and think it's how terrible it might be. I think you need to have these corrections, and I think the counterculture movement back then, much like the politics of today, with the divide between Republicans and Democrats, I think it's all a correction of just what we normally have, and this too shall pass, just like that passed. I think it's just part of our democracy evolving.
I do think there were some positive things in it, because I think that women were still treated very badly, and they didn't have a very big say in society. They were supposed to be the stay-at-home person, and the man was supposed to make all the decisions. So I think in that aspect, it really helped the female person versus the male. I think that it did a lot for women.
It did have a meaningful impact. I mean, if you look back on the effect it had, and even today, when things aren't going the way that people may want, they are more apt to get organized in some fashion to work to bring about a more positive change. And yes, there were like all the campus riots and things like that. Did they need to take place? My opinion is no, but I'm just not that kind of guy. But did some type of reaction need to be happening about all the innocent people that were being harmed by what was going on? Yes.
Probably what I saw, not so much personally, but I think the use of mood altering substances, it was really rampant and really out of control. And not just marijuana, a lot of stuff.
I think along with the free love and the, like, let's just do whatever we want and not have any rules kind of life back in the 70s, that it made people not as responsible and not as respectful. And I think that there was a lot of changes in society because of that, and that's where we are today with kids not being respectful and not being responsible. That I think a lot of it stemmed from that era, that prior to that, everybody was still concerned with the way they dressed and how they acted in public, and going to church and religion was a big thing that people kind of got away from back in the 70s. So I think it affected everything today.
Bell bottoms. Seriously. And the button flies and yeah. The clothes probably, yeah. We took them seriously now. It's like, you wore that stuff?
To me, the term, and probably from what I went through, the term counterculture is pretty much anything that goes against the status quo. So, you know, in the late 60s and the 70s, there was a lot of counterculture influence for all kinds of different reasons. You talked about the other categories like music and social reform, and there were lots of different areas. So I think though, where I'm now sitting here, I'm 65 years old, I have my life, a lot of my life behind me. I think what I've learned is it's better that we have diversity. It's better that people have different opinions. Sometimes it's not real pretty when people are banging heads, but I think it's important to do that.
I'm not entirely sure what it means exactly, but it sounds to me like they're saying that it wasn't the norm. Like it took what regular society was and it changed it.
When I think of counterculture, I just think of a change within, the younger people and wanting to go in a different direction. And a lot of it's good. A lot of it's good. I mean, nothing in the world is perfect now. Nothing has ever been perfect. Nothing will be perfect. But as long as that energy is directed into making positive gains, that's a good thing. When it becomes destructive, that's not so good. And we've seen it go both ways.